The sun was beginning to sink behind the endless stretch of Texas plains as the Henderson family's old pickup bounced along the winding dirt road. Dust rose in lazy clouds, coating the windshield, making the horizon appear even more distant and isolated. Mark Henderson, a man in his late 30s with broad shoulders and calloused hands, tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had spent years in a hectic office job, and the city's constant noise had worn him down. This weekend was supposed to be an escape, a chance for him, his wife Ellen, and their 2 kids, Sophia and Jack, to reconnect with one another, to breathe in quiet and simplicity. Ellen, seated beside him, stared through the grimy window at the barren landscape stretching for miles. The wind ruffled her hair, and a small shiver ran down her spine. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the promise of fresh air, open skies, and a few days away from deadlines and traffic jams. Yet, there was an unmistakable tension in the way the air seemed to hang, heavy and still, almost watchful. In the back, Sophia, 10, was fidgeting in her seat, glancing curiously out the side window at the long twisted trees that dotted the fields. Her younger brother Jack, 7, pressed his face to the glass, his small hands smudging the dusty surface as he squinted into the distance. Both kids had been bubbling with excitement when they left the city, but now even their energy seemed tentative, as if the landscape itself was imposing some invisible caution. Finally, after what felt like hours, the pickup crested a small rise, and the farmhouse came into view. It was older than Mark had imagined when he saw it online. A weathered skeleton of a home that had clearly endured decades of Texas storms. Its paint was flaking, the wood warped and grey, and the windows, once probably bright with sunlight, were darkened by years of grime and neglect. A chill ran through Ellen's spine, and she instinctively reached for Mark's arm, gripping it tightly. "It looks different from the pictures," she said softly. Mark forced a smile, trying to mask his own unease. "It's just old, charming even. Give it a chance," he said, though even he noticed the way the wind whispered through the empty yard, carrying a faint creaking sound as if the house was sighing in anticipation. As they approached the porch, the wooden floorboards groaned under their weight. Sophia ran ahead eagerly, her small feet striking the warped wood, but the handle of the front door refused to turn. Jack followed, nervously glancing around the yard, his small frame tense. "It's creepy," he said, voice barely audible. He reached for Sophia's hand and held on tightly, as though the act of holding someone else could somehow keep the strange feeling at bay. Once inside, the air was thick and heavy with dust, and a faint metallic tang clung to their noses. A combination of rust, mildew, and years of neglect. Sunlight filtered in through the broken blinds in thin, slanted lines, casting jagged shadows across the walls that seemed to twitch and bend with every slight movement. Ellen's stomach knotted, a cold dread settling deep in her chest. The house was too quiet, not the peaceful quiet they had imagined, but a suffocating stillness that made every creak, every whisper of wind, sound amplified and deliberate. The family began to unpack, trying to shake off the growing unease. The children's laughter, though tentative, filled the rooms briefly, breaking the oppressive silence. But as evening fell and shadows deepened, the farmhouse transformed. The wind blew through the cracks in the siding, creating strange, half-formed sounds. Doors that had seemed firmly closed now creaked open slowly, as if nudged by unseen fingers. The shadows elongated and moved in ways that defied the angles of the room, stretching and curling toward them with a predatory patience. Sophia was the first to notice the subtle shift. "Mom, did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound brave. Ellen paused, straining to listen. At first, it was faint, a scratch, almost imperceptible. Then it came again, deliberate and slow, like fingernails dragging along old wood. "It's just the house settling," Ellen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Even as she spoke, a low thud echoed from the upstairs hallway. Mark's chest tightened. He grabbed a flashlight from the bag by the door, its metal body cold and solid in his hand, and slowly made his way up the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight, a reminder that the house had endured decades of use and neglect, yet now seemed alive, responding to their presence. At the top of the stairs, the attic door loomed slightly ajar. Mark hesitated, feeling the weight of the house's silence pressing down around him. The air smelled colder up here, heavier. He pushed the door open, revealing a room coated in cobwebs and filled with broken furniture. In the corner, the outline of a rocking chair caught the light from his flashlight. It was moving ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if someone, or something, had just stood up and left. His heart thumped violently, each beat echoing in his ears. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ellen realized Jack had vanished. Her panic flared. "Jack, where are you?" she called, her voice cracking. A high-pitched giggle answered from somewhere nearby, chilling in its intensity, because it wasn't a sound Jack normally made. She ran toward the sound, finding him at the top of the staircase, frozen, staring at the empty hallway. "I saw someone," he whispered. "They're in the shadows." Mark attempted to reassure him, though the words sounded hollow. "It's just shadows, buddy, that's all." But even as he spoke, he could feel it. The house wasn't ordinary. The walls, the floors, even the air seemed to lean closer, watching, listening. By nightfall, the house had fully asserted itself as a living, breathing presence. The family huddled in the kitchen, the only room that felt remotely safe. Ellen poured tea, her hands trembling, trying to focus on the mundane task. Mark sat opposite her, flashlight by his side, staring at the shadows, his jaw tight with tension. Outside, the wind rattled the windows in a rhythm that mimicked soft whispering. Each gust seemed to carry a word, an almost intelligible voice calling their names, brushing against their ears and sending chills down their spines. Hours later, when they finally tried to sleep, terror crept in even deeper. Sophia awoke to the sound of scratching at her bedroom door, the handle rattling violently, though no one was outside. Jack murmured in his sleep, muttering about shadows looming over him, and Ellen held him close, whispering prayers she hadn't thought of in years. Mark lay awake in the master bedroom, listening to the house groan and settle in ways that were too deliberate, too purposeful. Something was very wrong, too wrong, and yet every time he tried to convince himself it was just an old house, a slow, deliberate footstep echoed from the attic, and he knew, without a doubt, that they were not alone. Morning came, but it offered no relief. The sun struggled to pierce the heavy grey clouds that seemed to hover stubbornly over the plains, casting the farmhouse in a washed-out, ghostly light. Everything outside appeared muted, as if the land itself had been drained of colour and warmth. Mark suggested exploring the property, hoping that open air and some activity might ease the oppressive tension that had settled like a weight in their chests. Ellen hesitated, her instincts screaming that the house and the surrounding fields were not just empty, but hostile. Even the wind seemed to carry a quiet warning, stirring the tall grasses in a way that felt deliberate, almost watchful. Sophia, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and unease, wandered toward the old barn. Its structure leaned slightly, as if bowing under the weight of time, and the boards creaked ominously beneath her light steps. Inside, the barn smelled of rust, rotting hay, and something faintly metallic that she couldn't identify. Old farming tools lay scattered on the ground, tangled with fragments of broken machinery and worn boots that had been left behind for decades. In a corner, a small intact toy, a miniature horse, sat perfectly clean among the decay, as if someone had placed it there recently. As Sophia reached to touch it, a shadow darted across the rafters. She froze, heart pounding, and blinked. The shadow lingered just a second too long, before vanishing, leaving the barn strangely colder than before. When Mark and Ellen found her, she was pale and shaken, clutching the toy like a talisman. "I saw someone," she insisted. "They're watching us." Her voice trembled, and Ellen's heart sank at the unmistakable fear in her daughter's eyes. Mark tried to reassure her, but his own unease echoed in his tone. "We're okay, kiddo. There's no one here. It's just old buildings and shadows," he said, though he knew it sounded unconvincing, even to himself. That evening, the farmhouse seemed to pulse with life, though not the kind of life that offered comfort. The family huddled together in the living room, each trying to find safety in the collective warmth. The shadows were longer now, stretching unnaturally along the walls, creeping closer in corners where light failed to reach. A whispering began, soft at first, almost a hiss, carrying an urgent, incomprehensible language that made the hairs on Ellen's arms stand on end. The rocking chair in the attic groaned again, sliding back and forth with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if propelled by hands unseen. Mark's fear sharpened into determination. He could not allow the house to manipulate them further. Armed with a flashlight and a heavy wrench, he climbed the stairs to the attic, his breath coming in shallow, tense bursts. The air grew colder with each step, and the old wood beneath his feet protested loudly. When he reached the attic, it was empty, but the rocking chair, once motionless, now faced the center of the room, moving back and forth as though aware of his presence. He swung the flashlight across the attic, illuminating piles of broken furniture and dusty boxes. Yet he found no one. Still, the sensation of being watched pressed down on him with suffocating intensity. Downstairs, Ellen tried to comfort the children. Jack clung to her tightly, shivering and muttering that they were in the walls, that they knew what we were thinking. Ellen's own fear was a heavy, creeping shadow at the edge of her mind. She realized the house wasn't simply haunted by the past. It was feeding off them, testing their nerves, probing the limits of their fear. Night stretched interminably. The walls groaned, doors slammed without wind, and the whispers grew more insistent, forming fragments of words that were half understood and wholly threatening. Each sound was amplified in the eerie stillness, echoing with a rhythm that mimicked the family's heartbeat. Panic began to take hold, gnawing at their minds. The house had become more than an old building. It was a predator, and they were trapped within its silent, suffocating maw. As the second night deepened, Mark and Ellen knew they could not wait for dawn. They needed to escape, and soon. But when they ventured toward the door, the dirt road outside had disappeared, swallowed by a thickening mist that hung low over the fields. The familiar path they had driven along hours earlier now seemed distorted, unreal. The farmhouse itself seemed to twist and shift, hallways lengthening and rooms bending slightly when no one looked, as if it were alive, reshaping itself around them to prevent their departure. By morning, the Hendersons were exhausted and drained, their nerves frayed to raw edges. They gathered in the living room, one last time. Sophia held tightly to Jack, her small hands trembling. Ellen wrapped her arms around both children, seeking to shield them from the creeping dread that lingered like smoke. Mark stood in the center, flashlight gripped tightly, scanning the walls, searching for something tangible to fight. The whispering had ceased, leaving a silence so complete it pressed down like water, thick and suffocating. Then the attic door creaked open slowly. From the darkness, the rocking chair moved forward, inch by inch, its motion slow and deliberate. The family froze, paralyzed by the tension, and then screamed as Mark instinctively lunged forward to block it. But there was nothing there, no figure, No shadow, only the chair, moving of its own accord. It seemed to sigh with a deep, mocking exhalation, as though acknowledging their terror, their futile struggle to assert control. Without a word, Mark grabbed Ellen's hand, and together they urged the children toward the back door. Outside, the mist swirled around them, thick and suffocating, yet somehow the field seemed more real than the house that had imprisoned them. They ran blindly, not caring where they landed, driven solely by a primal need to put distance between themselves and the building that had haunted their every thought. Even as the farmhouse receded behind them, the echoes of its presence remained. Every step across the dew-soaked grass carried the memory of whispered threats and unseen eyes. Each gust of wind seemed to carry fragments of the voices that had haunted the walls. Their lungs burned, hearts pounded, but there was no turning back. By the time they reached the highway, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting harsh light on the flat plains. They stopped, panting, backs pressed together, and dared to glance back. The farmhouse sat silent and still, appearing as though it had never moved, breathed, or whispered. Yet deep inside, each of them knew the truth. It had watched them, learned from them, and waited. And though they had escaped its immediate grasp, the house would remain, patiently lying in wait for the next family drawn into its open doors. The Hendersons drove on, each lost in their own thoughts, the terror of the previous 2 nights refusing to fade. Shadows lingered at the edge of their vision, fleeting glimpses that may have been nothing. Yet every instinct screamed that the house's influence had not ended. It had planted something in their minds, an unshakable knowledge. Some places are alive in ways we cannot comprehend, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Even as they left the farmhouse far behind, a part of them remained trapped within its walls, forever haunted by the creaking, whispering house in the desolate Texas plains. And the farmhouse, patient as ever, waited silently for the next family to wander unsuspectingly into its grasp, eager to feed again on the fear that only the living could provide.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.